So let's begin. Welcome everyone to this, the first sort of public meeting of this legacy project. It's really lovely to see so many people coming, and they're still coming in. Thank you so much for coming tonight. My name's Julia Outlaw, and I'm one of the trustees of the charity. Just to say a word about that, the charity for the F. Matthias Alexander Technique was set up in 1996 by a group of ex-STAT chairs. And its aim really was to create a sense of community for teachers, for pupils of the technique, and also for the public. And we've run different events, lectures with different guest speakers, a series of workshops, concerts. And John Hunter had this idea, with talking to others, an important idea about creating a legacy of the first generation teachers, and really trying to record some of the memories of the people who were lucky enough to work with them, and what they learned from them. And it's invaluable really for younger teachers and for others. And so this is the first public meeting. We've had a few Zooms, and the subject is Margaret Goldie. And we're lucky enough to have a really great, generous panel who volunteered to be here tonight. So there's 8 of them. They should be spotlighted on your screen. And I'll ask them to introduce themselves. So whoever wants to go, unmute and go for it.
Okay, well, I'll start. I'm John Hunter, and I visited a colleague's training course a couple of years ago, my generation of teacher, and we started talking about the old days and teachers that we'd worked with. And my colleague's students were listening very attentively and said, "Oh, wish we had a microphone because it's so interesting to hear about these first generation of teachers." And that made me realize that if we want to record our memories and experiences of working with these people who were pupils of Alexander, we need to do it now because we're all getting on a bit ourselves. And that was what prompted me to start this legacy project. I had lessons with Margaret Goldie over a period of about 12 years. I suppose, not always that often, more often at the beginning, and then she would say, "Oh, well, you can come in 3 months or something." And it helped me a great deal to relate the teaching to my life. But I've been told not to talk too much in the introduction, so I'll pass on to somebody else.
Thank you, John.
Hello. I'm Gerda, and I started with, I met Margaret Goldie in 1981, in the middle of my training. And I don't think I would have qualified without her lessons whilst I was training with Mr. MacDonald. And I worked with her for about 10 years, I would say.
Thanks, Gerda. Yes, Peter.
Well, my name is Peter Bloch, and rather like Gerda, it sounds like about the same time. I think from about 1981 for about 10 years. I had a lot of lessons from Margaret Goldie, particularly before I started training. I went once a week for probably a year, and then smaller numbers of lessons at other times. So there were a lot of them in the end.
I could go next. I'm Penny Sporforth. Grew up with the Alexander Technique around me because my parents were Alexander teachers, and trained with Carringtons. But I met Margaret Goldie in 1989 and last year of my training course. And yeah, as soon as I saw her, I both felt a little intimidated, but also I knew there was something special in what she had to offer. And I had lessons then with her from 89 to about 94 when my daughter was born, including during my pregnancy. Yeah, and she definitely had a big impact on my teaching.
Okay, I'm Michael Trautmann from Germany, and I'm a classical guitarist. And after studying guitar, I started in 85 with Judah Cooperman, the training course, and then I went on studying until 91 in Israel, including postgraduate studies. And I heard about Margaret Goldie, and I decided to, when I was back in Germany, to spend all my holidays between 91 and 96. I spent three times a year. I was in London and took more than 100 lessons. I didn't count them, but definitely more than 100, maybe 110, maybe even some more. So it was very intensive, and always blocks of 1 week. Yes, and she made a very big impression, and she helped me to solve many questions I had from all these years of training.
Thank you, Michael. And Michael?
So, can you hear me? Yeah.
Perfect.
I'm Mike Masterman, and I had 7 lessons in 1990s. I can't remember exactly when, but I did write them up, and I think, as far as I know, the first lot has been just published in Stat News. Yes, I found her. Unfortunately, they were cut short because she became ill, and but yes, I found them very helpful.
Thank you. Dalia?
So I am from Israel, and I've been in all the teachers you mentioned before. All of you started 17, and then I've been sent to meet to Miss Goldie, and it changed my life. I started to take lessons from her for about a few months. I came to England for 1 week or 2, and then after 2 years of that, I decided to move to England with my 2 daughters and have a whole year with Miss Goldie to train me to be a teacher, because I was not happy to be a teacher the way I was taught before. And then after, it was 85 to 86, and then until she died, I went about 3 or 4 times a year for about a week or a few days until she had the last lesson when she felt, when I was there. This is another story if you would like to hear about it, but that's it.
Thank you, Dalia. Thank you. And Louise?
I suppose you're talking about Louise, me, here. Yeah? Okay. I'm from Quebec, Canada, and I had lesson with Margaret Goldie from the second year of my training in 1990 until, I don't remember the year of her death, but until then. And Margaret Goldie was a very, very important teacher for me. She tried to teach me how to stop, considering that my very active, neurotic thinking self was always there, And I experienced with her, where it seemed that this self would seem to want to come to a halt when I was with her. And I would experience some kind of peaceful joy.
There's so many questions that we want to know and the answers to, and experiences we'd like to hear. If anybody who's watching has a question for anyone on the panel or for the panel generally, please just put it into the chat and we will try to get to them. Also, some people have submitted questions previously. Thank you. And we'd love to get the chance to hear those. We are hoping to run for the next hour and a quarter and see what we can hear in that time. And maybe just to start, an impossible question really, but how would you describe Miss Goldie? What was she like? And to somebody who'd never met her, how would you describe her? Feel free to just chip in, panel.
Very hard to describe the way she looked. For me, it's like some out of this world.
In what way?
Because she was already older. I mean, she was not a young person when I started, but think she was 7. I don't know how old she was, and she was very quiet and very firm at the same time, even before you talk to her. Just the way she looks, a strong person with a lot of interested and compassion for other people, and she could see you.
I think the thing that stands out for me, and other people will say many other things that I could say too, but the thing that stands out to me, and even today when I imagine my lessons with her or hear some of the words that she used, her voice had a kind of ethereal quality to them. I almost can't say the directions that she gave without thinking them in her voice. That had such a powerful impact to me in something about, otherworldly or ethereal. It's hard to pinpoint words, but they had a stronger impact on me than almost any other teacher, her voice, I think.
Yes, I agree, Penny. As you were speaking, I was remembering that she had a quiet presence and authority, really. You knew you were in the presence of someone who knew what she was talking about, knew what she wanted to convey to you. And she did have this way of, as one of my colleagues once put it, dropping words into your ear in such a way they seem to go very deep into your brain.
Yeah, for me, what stands out is her 100% attention to when she was listening to you. And she was totally not self-serving. She was there for you. And according to what she observed and noticed, she would start working and give you hints.
I was going to say something about outward appearance, because when I first had lessons with her doing the arithmetic, looking at this, she was already over 80, and I was in my early 20s. And she was a little old lady, and she looked her age, but she looked well, and she looked vibrant. She didn't look younger than she was. She was a little bit hunched over. I understand she had sort of back problems from childhood. And the most striking thing was her straw hat, which she always wore while giving a lesson, which had feathers in it. And her clothes were like something, probably, I don't know, perhaps out of the 1940s, which made her look older still. She was very old-fashioned, and not just in her appearance, but in her manners, in her way of speaking. And we'll probably get onto this later about a manner of teaching, which is a bit more controversial because she could be quite harsh. but even that was kind of old school. She was like something from a different era. That was my experience.
Yes, already a picture of somebody quite unique and special in the attention, the presence, even appearance. What would you say was at the core of Miss Goldie's teaching? What have you taken from it? And Penny's also already said she still hears her voice, but what would you say she was trying to teach you, and what do you value about that?
I think I could just jump straight in and say her core message for me was come to quiet. It was, if I could sum everything up that she taught me, it was come to quiet. And that she used those words very often and very regularly, at least with me, I'm guessing with many people. And it dispelled. I was on my last year of my training course, and there were myriad directions we were being given, even to the extent of direct between your little toe and your heel. And she dispelled, she kind of like settled all of that into just a simple quietness, which wasn't like myriad directions giving. There were small, clear directions, just simple, and it settled all the confusion in my mind. That's, I think, the core of what I got from her.
Mike.
Yeah, I was going to say the clarity of her teaching came across, and the conviction behind it. And also, the other thing, apart from coming to quiet, was the brain work, the importance of brain work, which seemed to be fundamentally what she was trying to get across. And she had no truck with all the anatomy and all the rest of and the directions and all that sort of thing. It was come to quiet and brain work and doing it for yourself.
I know lots of people are interested in this, Mike, and others on the panel, brain work. What do we really mean? We talked about brain thought messages that Goldie used to talk about, and that maybe she placed less emphasis on the hands-on work, more on the brain work. What are these brain thought messages?
There was no either or with that. I mean, when I had lessons with her, her hands were on me from start to finish. This was not an either or, as some people have suggested. She worked with her hands, but she was asking me as a student to use my brain. And the expression she used with me was that it all happens at brain thought level. She sort of spoke in that sort of way. And I think it took me about 20 years to understand that. But that is the one thing that I think of a lot now. And she once said to me, young man, nearly always when she spoke to me, it started off with young man. And that if it starts from below the top of your ear, it's not the Alexander technique. All sorts of things may happen below the top of your ear, but the Alexander technique is about what you think. And as I said, it took me a very long time really clearly to understand that. But of course, it is.
Yes, brain work. She liked to say sometimes with a bit of grandeur, she would stand back and say, as if delivering a speech to 1,000 people, she would say, and the brain work more dynamic than ever. An expression she liked very much. Brain thought messages, for me, was just her way of saying directions or orders. And brain work was broader. It was the directions, it was the attention, the quality of awareness, and also making decisions. She was very strong on making decisions. What are your intentions? You only do what you decide to do.
And was that a large part of her teaching, John?
Yes, very much so. Teaching seemed to go through phases. In the early lessons, she didn't move me very much. She kept me in the chair quite still, waiting, I think, for me to really stop, not physically just to be still, but to really stop, to stop all the unnecessary nervous activity, unnecessary muscular tension, unnecessary thoughts. And when you were quiet, she might move you a little bit, and then you might notice that all that unnecessary activity started up again. So you had to work through being quiet.
Michael.
Yes, I would agree to Peter that I think it was her whole existence, including her hands, including her voice and her wording, what worked. And if you say in the beginning she did very little movement with you, I can say in all these 5 years, actually, it was not about movement. It was definitely not like I see in the McDonald's work, up and down and up and down, but it was about coming to quiet, as we said. And you wrote it in very nicely in your what you wrote about her. It's written very nicely. You became very quiet, very passive in a way, and on the other hand, the brain work more dynamic than ever, like she said. So you were very alert and very passive in the same time. And if you could keep this quietness and passiveness, she said, and now, young man, I'll just whisk you out of the chair. And so she whisked me out of the chair, and I stood, and that's where I stood. Then she kept on working on me, going on, creating this stillness, this quietness. And then she would say, sometimes after 20 minutes, that's all I can do for you today, young man. And I never thought, I paid this and that, I want half an hour or something. I felt so, it was complete how she did it. And I'm sure she was right to say, now I can't do any more for you. So this was very strong, and it makes clear that it was not about the physical thing. And in preparation today, I remembered in the very beginning with Jutta Kuppermann, we were bodies. There were bodies in the class. A body was somebody who was not participating in the teacher training, who you could work on. So I thought, if Margaret Goldie ever had a class, which she didn't, but certainly she would say there are some brains in the class to work on, maybe something like that.
Dalia, what would you say?
Well, it's hard for me. I would say that everything that I've heard today from my colleagues here, you say everything that I would, and you do it with a better English that I can do that. So I want to add few things. Her tendency and understanding, and the way she could wait for the person, for the student to wait until it's possible to get up, as you say. She was very, she had time. She didn't push you until you are ready, until your brain is able for her to help me to get up. or down. And sometimes it's, if you are not connected, you spoke about the brain, but she also said always to connect the brain through the whole body, and then you become a whole. And then you have to forget that and start again, to stop and be quiet again. And the more you do it in life, you become stronger by not doing, by studying and be quiet and stop doing it, but allow things to move with you. And the most important thing that I remember that is after every lesson, when I left, she would say, now you do your own discoveries. She always meant, when she spoke, that every one of us to go through discovery like Alexander did for himself. You have to do for yourself, to develop your own mind, or to do to know yourself more through life. And when you, Peter told me that it took you 2 years, 20 years to understand, I thought about it. It's the rest of your life that you have to change yourself and understand more each time differently. That's for the time being.
Cute. Louise, did you want to add?
Thank you, Michael. I think it was a very good, Michael Trotman. Your description was very, I laughed loud, whisk you out of the chair. I would add up, not that thing with your head. And I was so keen as a young teacher, learning. I was training. I was so keen. And all you've described about, very little touching on the chair, very little movement for the time of the lesson. And I remember once I was supposed to have reached a state of quietness. And when she said, I will whisk you out of this chair, my arms came forward and in, my knees went in, my head went back, but gross. I was so ashamed. I was so ashamed then because, I was a student teacher and but it was so exaggerated. I saw it all. And then after that, I kind of looked at her and she didn't make a fuss about it. She thought it was correct. It was okay. And she just kind of, we continued the lesson, and that was it.
Can I comment on that? Because this was actually in my very first lesson when I came to see her. I had exactly the same experience, and it was very interesting because she worked on me, and as you described it, I did exactly the same thing, and then I tried. I was about to say, but I felt I cannot do it, yeah? And in this moment, I remembered all my reading. I mean, all the, what's said, you feel something and you think you should do this and that because you feel wrong. So I didn't say it. And because I understood what it was. And this was a very important moment for me, a very important moment, because I understood that it's exactly what the work is about, to stick to a decision and to resist the urge to react on something. I had the assumption maybe I didn't know in this moment if she's in charge, actually, because she was 86 years old. She was very fragile. And I thought, oh, if I'm going to fall on her and things like that. So it was, I was embarrassed afterwards, because I did already 6 years of studying when it happened to me. So, yeah.
I would just add up, if I may, a moment. It's about, for me, it's just very important, this experience and all that, because I was so scared of doing things wrong. I was so keen of doing things right and well. And it's like, and one thing the teachers normally with who I was to what I call give me flowers, good, and all that. So I felt right. I felt approved of and all that. But with Goldie, that was not like this. There was no flowers. There was no violence or nothing like this. But it really taught me something very, very profound to that effect.
Thank you.
When you were speaking, Michael, I was reminded of a similar experience that I felt now I can connect what I'm studying with what's in the books. Because often in the training courses, I mean, I loved them. They were wonderful experiences, but I couldn't necessarily connect it with some of the things Alexander was writing. And then with Margaret Goldie, I began to see, yes, that's what Alexander's asking us. And of course, I couldn't correspond to it, but I knew then more what I was working towards. And sometimes the door would open.
I was going to say one thing about your experience, Louise, because I had that experience many times, is that when she came to move me, things would fall apart quite dramatically. Although she wasn't always quiet about it. Sometimes there would be like a sort of or something like that, a sound of a God with whatever I was doing. But I mean, this in a way brings on to another point, and I don't know if the rest of you share this, and what you're not saying suggests that maybe you do, which is that as somebody who had lessons with a lot of the first generation teachers, Margaret Goldie was, in my experience, distinctly less skilled with her hands than they were. So, for example, if Walter Carrington was taking you out of the chair, it was almost an impossibility that things could go that wrong. I mean, he or Pat MacDonald, they completely had you. You went the way that they intended, which was fantastic. But Margaret Goldie didn't have skills like that. She couldn't. So in a way, it was advantageous as well, because it was over to you. And if you went wrong when the critical moment came, then it went wrong, because she didn't have the sort of hands-on skills that she could make sure it went right if you were going to go wrong. That's my experience. I don't know if the rest of you share that. I don't know. I don't think we discussed that.
If I understood you, I think this was her most important thing, that she didn't hold you to make you feel secure. I think that's what you meant. And it's because she waited for you that your brain will take you up or down. And she only just touched to give directions a little bit. And this is the way how you can do for yourself, and you don't need others to help you for that. I think that's what I would say about you. She is not holding you, and you can go wrong. There is nothing. When she felt for me that she did something that I wasn't right or something, she used to say, I'm sorry, I'm not complaining. Always, when she touched something that was not, this is the way she was, to let you develop yourself.
There was, Peter, this moment in the first training course when Alexander came into the class, and he said, talking about his private lessons, now I can give it to them whether they want it or not. And I think quite a few of those first generation teachers thought, yeah, we want to be able to do that, and they did manage to.
Exactly so.
And some of the others, certainly Erica Whittaker was one, thought, well, what's the point of that? Because really they need to be helped to find it for themselves. So I don't know whether Goldie could or couldn't, but for me it was never an issue. If I wanted that, I could go to Patrick or Marjorie or someone else. But I really valued that I was being persuaded and helped to find my way there through this process of thinking, merely thinking and not reacting. And then suddenly you might find yourself moving in and out of the chair, and but in a quite new way, not with very strong help of directed hands.
I would like to say something about, to me, the quality of a touch seemed to do something. I don't think it was really penetrating like other teacher might have been able to give to you. And she was, but one thing, like I said at the beginning, I said like she would have just these little touch moving me forward, a little bit backward, a little bit forward, a little bit backward, and then there would be this kind of I don't know, like everything becomes whole, and I was not thinking of something else. There was not a separation between my, like I said, my neurotic thinking, and it's and that was just what I experienced with her. And once I remember she worked most of the time on the chair, and one day she says, "I think we'll have a lying down turn." I was so excited. I'd never had any lying down turn with her. So I kind of ran to the table almost, She said, "What are you doing?" She says, "The way to is as part of the lesson as lying down on the table." And I remember in training courses, like very often, like we end up, all those bodies lying down on the table. And anyway, she taught me something very important of what I had become to understand in my training course. Another thing I would like to add is that she said once when I came at the beginning with my in my second year's training, and she says, "I wonder what you're doing in those training courses." I don't know if any of you have heard that from her. No? It probably.
She told me quite frankly, sorry, I was going to say, she told me quite frankly that nobody apart from Mr. Alexander, he always referred to him as Mr. Alexander, nobody apart from Mr. Alexander was actually qualified to run a training course.
Yeah.
And I said to her, but it was when I was I finally got a place on the Carrington training course. I was very excited. When I went for my lesson, I told her this. And so I said, but I'm training with Walter, surely, he knows what he was doing. He ran Alexander's training course in his last years and so on. And there was this quite long gap. And then she said, "Ego," like that. So she just didn't think. I mean, thank goodness they did run training courses. Otherwise, where would we be? But she didn't think anybody was qualified.
Michael.
Yes, Peter, I read this now also, that some people say she didn't have good hands, and I think you cannot separate her person from their hands, and their hands were perfect for what she was doing. They didn't feel. Definitely, they didn't feel quite good, I would say. She grabbed me by the throat sometimes, and that she had these old bird-like claws almost, yeah. And this was not pleasant, yeah. But the effect was extraordinary, yeah. And about what she said to you on your way to the table, I had I must say the fortune that once I waited for her outside, and she swept up the stairs in Bloomsbury Center. She swept up these stairs, and she saw me sitting down there, and I knew what I had coming, because she said, "Oh, why don't you get up and go into the working room?" And I really was afraid, because I knew I would fail. I mean, she would comment on it, yeah. And so I would get up and go in, and then she was not very pleased about my movement. And she said, "Young man, when do you think the lesson starts?" Yeah. For her, the lesson started. It never stopped, actually, for her. Yeah. So she said, you throw your legs in front, you throw your chest, and your head is the last part getting out of the chair. And so she could be very clear about these things. But again, I think she had perfect hands for what she was doing. And I saw that Regina Stratil is here. I was reading the Tasker book, which, Peter, you recommended it. It's brilliant. And she says something about the use of the hands, that she asked Alexander if she should develop the use of the hands. And because she didn't have the training, and he said, of course you shouldn't. You should not develop. It comes by your own approach. And that's what's for Margaret Goldie the same. She didn't start in the training course, but she started as an apprentice of Alexander. And I think these people developed their own touch.
Thank you, Michael. There's lots of questions coming in. So just to sort of follow on from what you were saying, it's obviously this teaching has touched you, and using it in your life. And how did Miss Goldie embody what she knew in her life? And did she help her pupils do that? It sounds like she did. She wanted you to do the work. But how did she help you take it into life?
Could I just follow on from Michael's, which might not perfectly match your latest question, but it's kind of a little bit connected, because I feel like she had us do the work. She didn't teach you directly. She taught you indirectly. And I think the biggest lesson I had from her, and it was a bit like Michael was saying, was when she switched over to Bloomsbury, and I was sitting outside her room, and she would call me in, and she would watch me, exactly as Michael was saying. And the first time that happened, I remember her just being so irritated with me for jumping up too quickly. And so the next time I would come along to her lesson, and I would think she really wants me to inhibit and direct. So I went in, and I took my time, and I thought about my directions, and I stood up, and she was so irritated with me. And she said, "You don't need to take so long about getting out of the chair." And then the next time I came along, I realized that I couldn't please her. And so I stopped trying to please her. From that moment on, she never said anything again from me. And it was like, that was like such a vital, important lesson I had. But she didn't teach it to me. She didn't tell me, stop trying to please me. I had to figure that one out myself.
Was that a lesson for life?
Yes, very much so. Absolutely. Of course, because when you realize that you're there trying to please your teacher rather than trying to really embody a principle, then yes, there's a big internal shift that happens.
Thank you.
I just wanted to add something about hands as well, because she, more than once, she said to me in a lesson that Alexander had said to her, and with other people present, complaining really about the training course students. He said, they're all in such a hurry to use their hands. I'm waiting for the one who isn't. And some years later, I told this story to Erica Whittaker, who was really quite upset about it, because she said, well, why didn't he say that to us? And the next time she saw Walter, she said, is it true that Alexander said this? And Walter said, yes, he did. And why didn't he say it to us students? And Walter's comment was, he didn't believe in telling people what to do.
Yes, Nadia.
It reminds me of what Miss Goldie told me after many years of studying. I asked her something which I don't remember, but many times later I asked her, and then she said, if you do not understand what it is, it's not the time for you until you realize for yourself. And she didn't answer me. She wanted waiting until I realized by myself what I asked her or my questions. She didn't answer my questions. It was it's very similar, I think, for what you said about Mr. Alexander, isn't it?
Good, yeah.
Yeah, she made me aware of when my intention was in the wrong place. And I agree with Peter that her hands were sort of, they wouldn't move, but her touch was absolutely crystal clear on where it needed to be on the body. So she didn't I can't remember having done a whisper da with her, but she would prod my ribs and something would happen as a result. And if I wouldn't be aware of it when I would be standing in front of the chair or I would be sitting in a certain way. And she would just look and ask me to walk around and come back and simply stand and connect and listen. And then she would start. And, well, I only start to glimpse now what it means. But her words of coming back to quiet has been absolutely essential all these years and has been a lifesaver. I am absolutely clear about that. Without it, I don't know where I would be.
Good. Let's move on then. There's been a few questions about how Miss Goldie taught. And we've mentioned a bit already that she was quite firm and young man, and some of the interactions, the stories that you hear about are quite shocking. She was maybe sometimes very strict or fierce. Do you think that was just her? Do you think it was deliberately helping her teaching? Did you feel her compassion? Can we say something about that?
I think it was her compassion and her absolute devotion to the Alexander work. because she could not let anyone do anything that was not related to the work. So when she would behave like that, it was because, in my case, I was doing something wrong. Either my attention was in the wrong direction, or physically I was doing something. And then she would lose her temper if you wouldn't listen. And I think it was compassion.
Well, she was often harsh about other people in the things that she said to me. So I'm not sure that was all there was to it. I mean, there was a woman who was on a frequent visitor as a teacher to where I was training with the Carringtons. She'd been teaching maybe about 10 years at the time, and she was a wonderful teacher. And she went to Miss Goldie a lot for lessons. And on one occasion, I don't know whether Miss Goldie knew that I knew her, but she was coming out of her lesson as I was coming into mine. And as she went out, Margaret Goldie sort of shook her head dramatically and said, "Poor woman has no idea what she's doing." So these were sort of Margaret Goldie stories. I mean, she did do things like that, you know. Yeah, okay. You know, I mean, it's old school. I mean, I don't think she was like horrible and cruel or anything. And she did have a twinkle in her eye, and I did like her, you know, or I'd not have gone back. But I think it would be untrue to say that she couldn't be remarkably harsh sometimes.
I would like to share an experience that I had with her. I think I started lessons with her in 1989, and I was pregnant with my child in 1994. So I'd been coming to her for about 5 years at that point. And she was getting kinder and softer with me over the years, is how I sensed it, as she sensed I was understanding something of what she was trying to teach. And in that lesson, she asked me to go into Monkey, and I was there. And she was asking me to think while I was there, and I was thinking. And she's got more and more frustrated with me because whatever it was she was wanting to see, she couldn't see it happening. And at some point, whether it was my pregnant hormones or whatever, I don't know, but at some point I started crying. And she mistook my crying for giving up or for caving in or something. I just felt like really frustrated that I couldn't understand how I could do any different thinking to what I was already doing. And so we ended the lesson on quite a kind of difficult note. But the beautiful thing was she rang me up that evening and she said, "Penny, I've been thinking," and she's got this ethereal voice, and she didn't outright apologize, but she did say to me, "I've been thinking very much about what happened in that lesson, and I would like to offer you what Mr. Alexander called a friendly." And I didn't know what that meant, but I came to understand that it meant it would be a free lesson. So she asked me to come back again and have a free lesson with her. And she was much gentler and kinder in that lesson. And then several times after that, at the end of the lesson, she would say, "No, that's a friendly, my dear." And she wouldn't take any money from me. So I think she really did also know her own reactivity in some ways too.
This is a story about how I came to England because of the war of Iraq. I don't know. I don't remember dates so much about. And I came and I thought
91.
What?
91.
Yeah. And because we have so many bombs to Tel Aviv, my student didn't come. So I decided, it's a time to go to study sometimes in England with Miss Goldie. And then I came, and the first time I asked her, "What do you think about the war?" And she said, "I have a point not to discuss things like this with my students." And wow. And, well, I'm coming from the house. And then she put her hand on my shoulders, and all of my tension that I've had, that I didn't know that I have it on my body and my head, just went down as if it disappeared. So this is a story about how she can help by being very harsh and not kind, to speak a woman who comes from the war and tells her, I don't want to speak about that. But it helps very much, the touch of being not discuss. Stop it.
Very touching. Let's go on to another question. This is about the Alexander technique and it being taught widely, being spread. And there was a quote from Margaret Goldie that it was never meant for everyone. It is meant for the few who wish to evolve. And do you think that's how Margaret Goldie saw her teaching? It was more of an esoteric teaching, or was it more of a humanistic teaching?
Yes, unfortunately, Jamie, who asked that question, has had to leave, but hopefully he'll
hear it.
Recording. I wouldn't use those terms, humanistic or esoteric. She certainly said that when I heard her say it, it was in a conversation with Goldie and Erica Whittaker. And Erica was sort of prompting Goldie to talk about things because she knew it would interest me. And she asked about teachers. A lot of teachers these days are not getting enough pupils. They always seem to be looking for more work. What do you think about that, Margaret? And that was when she said, well, it was never meant for everybody. It was meant for the few who wish to evolve. And my feeling about that is that she, like Alexander, connected his teaching, his ideas, with theories of evolution. Darwinism was the zeitgeist of the epoch when Alexander was developing his ideas, and he talked about evolution in his books. And I think Goldie subscribed to that she thought this was a work that people do on themselves if they want to, you could say, develop, rather than evolve, but they want to develop. She didn't see it as a therapy. She saw it as a way for people who wanted to be able to develop themselves. But I wouldn't say esoteric or humanistic.
Michael.
Yes, I would agree. I don't think it was esoteric. Maybe it was pretty practical in some way, because my impression is it's not excluding anybody, but I think in a way the Alexander work really to study is very, very demanding. And maybe in this sense, it's meant that not everybody will want to do this work. And I read now, which impressed me, that Irene Tasker, when she was in South Africa, she decided to reject people who hadn't read the books. She said, "Okay, you go home and read your book," and she didn't care. I mean, she could say, "Okay, I don't bother. They give me the money," but no, it again. I think it's maybe it comes from the complete. She really wants to teach something, and also as a musician, I know it can be very hard to teach a student who you see he will never learn it. Yeah. So I think it's maybe in this direction. I would like to comment on the whispered R, because it also was written short thing, because did she work with anybody of you with the whispered R? Okay,
Yeah.
because I asked her about it. I said, can we do the whispered R? And so she said, the whispered R is something I didn't understand. And she was 86 or 87, I don't know when I asked. But then she said, but you never know. Maybe one day I'll understand and then I'll teach you, something like that. Yeah. So and this was very impressive that she said, I don't know what it's about. I don't understanding, so I can't teach it. And I was very impressed with that. Yeah.
Yes, she said the same to me, Michael. I asked her about the whispered R, and she was quite honest in her response. And she said, well, I'm not very good at them. So I usually suggest that people try whatever they've been taught by another teacher. And then she invited me to do a whispered R my way with her hands on the back of my neck. And we never spoke about it again.
Yes, in relation to what Michael was just saying, and before, it's this whole demeanor that she had, this kind of openness of she knew what she knew and what she could see, and she wouldn't pretend. There was no pretense in her whatsoever. And she had this sort of, when she would say something like, I don't understand, or it had a lightness to it. She wasn't ashamed of it. It was just a fact. So what? And it opened up a field where you could learn and where you could be wrong. And as long as you were open to it, something would be happening. And that was always exciting. And so the feather in her hat that sometimes tickled in your neck, and those kinds of eccentric things were so heartwarming and so kind of opening a humanity that you don't often come across.
Just to follow on that, there was another question about, which we already talked about a bit, you didn't often have lying down turns. Do you think that was the same reason or different?
I certainly never did, never once. But I never did with Walter either, or with Pat MacDonald. Oh, I think I may have done with Pat MacDonald, never mind that, but I never did with Walter.
I had one lying down turn in 12 years. And it was very quiet. She didn't move around the table because the table was right up against the wall on two sides. But I do remember that her hands were just touching my knees, and I think I closed my eyes, just paying attention to this sensation in my knees, convinced that she was still touching my knees when her hands appeared on the back of my head. And I thought, oh, she's in two places at once. That's quite interesting.
Michael.
She did it once with me, and it was quite short, and it was very interesting because it was so strange. It was not what I was used to. Anyhow, she told me, this is interesting. She said once to me, I see these young teachers around in the center here. They seem to lie on their back half a day, and it doesn't seem to do them any good, she said. So she didn't believe in quantity. Also, it's the same with taking people up and down and up and down and up and down. She believed in quality, I think, in the moment. She believed in the decisions and in the brain the brain thought level.
Earlier.
It happened to me. I think she did once or twice, and this was my feeling too, that to be lying down, but give you directions as you standing like nothing else. And it's funny because all of us here mention that you don't lie once or never. And I can tell you that my daughter had some headaches, and she was 16, and she came to Miss Goldie. For her, she was most of the time on the table. And she came from the headache, and she was after a whole day of school and running, and she put her mostly on the table. To my opinion, it shows how different she taught every person differently for what she meant to help or to give them.
I have a sense that she taught people who were either training to be a teacher or were teachers quite differently to people who weren't. My sister also had some lessons with Margaret Goldie with no intention of becoming a teacher. And I can't really remember much about it now, and I need to ask her actually, but I do have a sense, even at the time, that she's dealt with my sister very differently to me. It was something about this passing on of the work that she was very keen to make sure it got passed on correctly.
Yeah.
Just to follow on with that, because it's an important part of this discussion, what do you think she did want to pass on? What would she want to have passed on to younger teachers?
She wanted you to work it out for yourself, really, to go through a process, rather like Alexander had. She thought that basically Alexander's ideas, that the technique as he'd taught it and practiced it, had already gone. It's already gone, she said. It's to be hoped that somebody will read the books and rediscover it. And I think that was what she expected of us.
Gerda?
I think she helped us to face the unknown, to not know, and to live with that insecurity, and to develop the strength and the connection and the relationship to oneself, so that you can adapt and be flexible without losing the essence. Because in a way, each lesson, that was the situation you were in. And if you were not in there by yourself, she would put you in there.
Louise?
Went to visit her at the hospital, and something happened that the glass got broken by the bedside and all that. And I started, and she was covered in water. I don't remember what. And I started to run around the bed to pull the curtains and things like this. And that little person is lying in bed like this. And she tells me, she says, "There is no need to rush." And then I was holding her hands she was lying in bed. I was holding her hands, and I said, "Oh, your hands." She said, "The brain, my dear, the brain." So that's all I wanted to say.
So,
Yes.
If you're talking about the hospital, I wanted to tell you how I found her when she fell after the last lessons that I had the day before. I came to her at 12 noon time, as we said, and she didn't open the door. And the man from the corner, she told me she didn't get out with the milk. Maybe look inside of the window. And then I saw her legs on the floor. So the man calls the police and the ambulance, that's what you say in English too. And they don't let me go in until they took her to the ambulance, and she let me go in to say goodbye. And you wouldn't believe it, she was probably in a lot of pain, or I don't know if you fall for how long she was lying there. And then what she said, I'm sorry you missed your lesson. Maybe we'll arrange later to have it. And, I stunned, because I think it's a lesson too. As you said, don't rush, just be quiet, never mind what happened. And this came to me for a long while of my life, how she behaved and what she told me. It was very funny and strange. And I don't know if she didn't recover then. It was after she died, isn't it? Do you know about it? She didn't allow me to go. She didn't want me to come to the hospital. She didn't allow me.
She was in hospital more than once because I visited her after she'd been in hospital and was quite bruised. So I don't know on which occasion it was. I did try to visit her in hospital once, but she wouldn't see me. And then a little while after that, I got a card from her in the post, just saying, "Oh, thank you very much for your visit," and I've taken her something, I can't remember what, but it was very nice that she wrote that thank you note.
One more questions, and I'm aware time is ticking on. If you're watching and you've got a burning question, now's the time to put it in the chat in case we have time. There was a question about Miss Goldie's relationship with Alexander. They obviously had a close relationship, and she obviously was very committed to his principles and his teaching. Is there anything else the panel would like to comment on that?
I don't think it was a sexual relationship. I think she was a great admirer of Alexander and tried to help him, especially when he was ill in later life. But I don't think it was what we would call now an intimate relationship.
Peter?
Well, yes, I was just going to say that you couldn't have a course of lessons with Margaret Goldie without emerging completely clear that she admired Alexander in just about every possible way. And she thought that his work was of the most enormous importance. and that he had been by far and away the outstanding teacher of it, and that there was no one to compare, really.
Michael, yeah.
Yes, I think so too. But I didn't feel. I think she was committed to the work, which of course was, incorporated with the person Alexander. But in my lessons, I mean, she didn't mention Alexander all the time. It didn't feel like he was always above her. But I remember one story. She said to me, Mr. Alexander, when you were in a room sitting by a desk and writing something, and he would come in and he would put your hand on your shoulder, you felt it the whole day. It was such a strong input that you cannot imagine something like. So she said explicitly to me. So, and in some way, I think he must have been really outstanding. I think, yeah, and I'm not sure, but I think there was never a teacher later who came to this level. So but I don't know. I just don't know. I didn't work with MacDonald, and so I don't know.
Well, Pat MacDonald told me, because I asked him that question, that he thought that Alexander was the best teacher there had ever been and was much better than him.
A question just came in. Did Margaret Goldie ever work with AR? What did you think of him and his teaching?
Oh, yes, she did work with AR, and she told me a story about that. She said when she first started having lessons, she had a lesson with Alexander in the morning and a lesson with AR in the afternoon. And she loved her lessons with FM and hated her lessons with AR. So much so that she wrote to her father, who was paying for the lessons, and complained about this. And she said her father wrote back to her and said, "Margaret, dear, I'm paying all this money so that you can deal with any situation that life puts in front of you, and this is one of them." But she said later they became great friends. And I think in her teaching, she did use a little bit of AR's approach of a sort of psychological challenge that you had to inhibit your reaction to, as well as a muscular one.
I seem to have heard from her once in our conversation about that she wished she would have been able to contribute more to Alexander, what Alexander has brought, and that she felt somehow sorry for not having been able to contribute more. I don't know if anybody else had heard that.
Something similar, a lot of humility. I can't remember how the conversation started, but she said that she and her contemporaries were so lucky to have been able to study with Alexander. And I said, well, I and my colleagues feel very lucky to be able to study with you. And she laughed and she said, well, you wouldn't say that if you'd known him. You wouldn't waste your time with me. And there was a genuine humility there.
To unmute, Dahlia. Yes, we can't hear you.
Now?
Yep.
I can hear. When I came, she said you were very lucky to come to study, but I was even luckier than you. Since I had lessons from Alexander. So it's really, she admired, and she used to tell me, I don't remember all of it, but she used to say, Mr. Alexander used to say everything that she told me about him. So about his inventions, what she said. Mm-hmm. Sorry about my English. It's getting worse in the time.
Great. Michael.
Yeah, I would say I think it was written somewhere what we think about the condition of the Alexander teaching nowadays, and I think this humility is a very, very important point. And in this sense, I think it was very important for Miss Goldie to make clear how important and how strong the work, Alexander's work was. Yeah, I remember a long time ago, I told, after reading the books, I told a German colleague who started a training course after I don't know, after 5 years of finishing. And so I said to him, when I read about Alexander, he must have been a very, very good teacher. It must have been, I never saw somebody curing a stutter or things like that, what he describes in his book. So this guy said to me, but if I would, this is a long time ago, if I would show you the letters or records of my students, there would be similar stories. Yeah? So he was sure that he was teaching on the same level. Yeah? And of course, this stops you from trying to look further. Yeah, I guess, and that's what my feeling is a little bit, or a strong bit, I would say.
Thank you, Michael.
I would like to say something. One of the questions that she left me with, I think, that I've over the following decades have really been left with, is that I couldn't emulate her teaching, and nor would I ever want to emulate her style of teaching. It was so not me. And so I was left we all, I guess, are left with, well, what does my style of teaching look like? And, her work was, well, you need to work that out for yourself. And I know that for me, I've needed more than just the Alexander technique to work that out for myself. So I guess I'm just bringing that in, and that might not be the case for everybody, but the message of come to quiet has been such an important message, but there have been other ways that I've understood that. To begin with, I didn't understand it at all. It's like, and she never explained what she meant by it. It sounds like a very obvious thing, but as a young 20-something-year-old person, I was like, well, I eventually realized she meant my thoughts. That's what I understood it to be, to quieten my thoughts and let that permeate through my body. But for a long time, I saw that as as transcending our thoughts. And I've also done a lot of work on transforming my thoughts. So, I guess we're all working through, since having lessons with her, how we bring ourself into our own teaching.
Thank you, Penny, and thank you all the panel. I wish we could carry on, but we are out of time. And it's been wonderful to bring to life, really, the legend that is Margaret Goldie. And I'm sure there'll be more questions and follow-up. John, do you like to say anything about what comes next?
Yes, thank you, Julia. We will publish this webinar. It might need a bit of editing first and trying to clean up some of the sound, but we will publish it. I'm aware that there are people here who also had lessons with Margaret Goldie, who have said that they would like to contribute on a future occasion. So we may have another webinar if there's enough interest, I will write to everybody who's here and invite you to let us know what you want, or maybe some smaller discussions where we can interact with the participants. For the Legacy Project, our next subject is Peggy Williams. So if any of you had lessons with Peggy Williams, please do get in touch, and we'll have one or two preparatory meetings and then a webinar like this to share with others. So thank you all for coming.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much. It's very nice to be with you all.
Thank you, Daria.
Thank you.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night.